Hey there, everybody. Just wanted to touch base with you today. It's Monday, May 4th, and the AP government exam obviously is 1 week from today. And I just want to make sure that, again, that you guys are fully prepared for the exam and you know what's going to be on there and you're going to know what to do. Uh, First and foremost, I've covered this many times already, but on the exam, you're going to have an FRQ Type 4 first, 25 minutes to do it, 5 minutes to upload. And then second, you're going to have an FRQ Type 1, 15 minutes to do it, 5 minutes to upload it. Again, like I emailed you today, there is a practice session going today on YouTube at 3 o'clock. The instructor is going to give you an FRQ 4 and then give you an FRQ 1. You're going to have 45 minutes to do it, and then I think they're going to want to get you to upload it onto the demo site just to make sure that your technology works for taking the test. So if you're at all have that time today, I would do it. If you have access to that and you have the time, please check out. Plus, there's 2 more questions for you to sample as well, just to get your mind going and see what you can come up with. Again, when you upload those answers, though, the College Board will not grade them. If you want some feedback on them, just make a copy, save it, and send it to me, and then I can give you feedback on your answers. Now, let me get started on just a couple things. I'll address the second question first, the FRQ Type 1. It's going to be your second question on exam day next week. It's the one you get 15 minutes for. It was made known to us, the teachers, over the weekend that they are tweaking the FRQ 1 a little bit. You know how they usually look. I've given you samples in class to do. You've done them on tests before, where you get basically a short scenario, and then you get like 3 questions. One of them's usually identify, one's usually describe, one's usually explain. 15 minutes, boom, you're good. It sounds like they're lengthening it a little bit. The reading scenario might be a little bit more in depth, and your 3 questions, you may not get an identify, a 1-sentence response type answer. It may be like describe this, explain this, explain this. There's a chance that a Supreme Court case might be involved, where they may give you like a description. So they may blend part of like FRQ Type 3 into the FRQ Type 1. Now, I'm confident that all of you guys can handle that. Just please remember, read the prompt, make sure you understand the prompt, and then focus on the task verbs. Does it ask for identify, describe, or explain? And again, if it says describe, or not, let me start with the beginning. If it starts with identify, you can probably answer that in 1 sentence. Just tell them what the thing is. If it says describe, you need to go more in depth, and you're probably looking at least 2 to 3 sentences. And if it says explain, you need to go even more in depth and possibly go from like 3 to 5. I was also going to say, too, when you go into explain, you really need to elaborate on what it is you're talking about, tie it back into the prompt, the question, and sometimes even giving examples is a good thing. If you can give like a real-life example to help show you the explain part, I would encourage you to do so. But just remember, you're going to get 15 minutes just for that question. I think that's where some of the advice was coming out, that if someone doesn't get all of it done, not to worry too much, because your score could still be, you could still get a good score. I think that's where that's coming from, is that they're adding certain things on to make it a little bit more challenging, and so they're fearful that some people may not get it all done. So just budget your time. You got 15 minutes. Just make sure, again, you answer the question, focus on those verbs, make sure you understand the prompt, and that will be FRQ Type 1. I'm assuming that they're going to show you one of those today at 3 o'clock on the YouTube channel. I'm assuming, too, since they're adding to it, that the point value may go up, and it may not just be worth the traditional 3 points. So we'll talk more about that this week, too, because, again, I've got those meetings scheduled with you guys Tuesday, Thursday, both at 4, and then Saturday at 1. We can go over any questions that you have over an FRQ Type 1 question. Tomorrow, I'm going to post some sample questions again on Google Classroom. I'd encourage you to do them. If you want to do one and shoot it my way, go ahead and I'll give you feedback. But I want you to get more practice. I want you to see more questions. I want you to see more sample answers so that you know what's coming your way. Now, I wanted to spend most of the time in this video today on the FRQ 4. I had you do one, and it was due on Friday. For those of you out there that haven't done it yet, it was due Friday by midnight. I got most people's. I'm still looking through them. I had a busy weekend doing different things. for world history and for some other things around the house and stuff. So I'm still working on getting some good feedback to those. But I just wanted to highlight a couple features for you. I would highly encourage you before exam day to go through and print off copies of some of the things I put on Google Classroom. There's a required foundational documents summary list. Okay, it's like 1.5 pages long, not even, and it's got like details, key details from each of the 9 foundational documents. I would highly encourage you to print that off and look through it. I also sent you on Google Classroom a summary sheet, basically, of these 15 Supreme Court cases. And again, I would encourage you to go in and print that off and look at it, okay, before the exam. Here's the thing. I don't know if you've noticed this, but on those FRQ4 type questions, you got to be able to talk about 2 pieces of evidence. And it's not going to be good enough for you. Let's say, for instance, you want to use Federalist 10 as one of your pieces of evidence. If you know that deals with factions, okay, that's great. It does. But that's not going to be enough to really get you the points. You got to be able to know how to include the evidence and then use it to back up your arguments. You got to be able to get in there and argue with it and show them that you know what it means and then prove your point. So again, just knowing that it deals with factions will not be nearly enough. You need to look at that summary sheet and then just think for yourself, depending on what the question is, how would you argue it? Now, the College Board instructor that's been putting out those College Board YouTube videos, I again put them on Google Classroom. I don't know if anybody checked them out. They're kind of a little lengthy, like around 50 minutes each. She came up with this outline sheet. It's Step 1 Outline FRQ4, and it's basically 1.5 pages. This can be a very useful tool when you go to set up your FRQ4, especially like when you're practicing. I'm trying to think of what the easiest way to describe this is with the camera. At the very top of this sheet, and again, I'm probably getting this bad with my camera, so you know what? I'm gonna attach this document for you for tomorrow. Or actually, you know what? I'll put it on there this afternoon. I'll just describe what the sheet has on it. It gets at the very top. It has option 1, option 2, and then it has under it reasoning. This is going to be like your choices for your thesis. Like what 2 options do you have with this question? And you basically put them there. You could either argue this or you could argue that. You're not making the argument yet. You're just putting down what your 2 options could be. Sometimes they'll give you 3, and if there's 3, you're going to have to maybe write off to the side because it only gives you a spot for 2. And in fact, I was going to go through a sample question with you here real quick, and the sample question unfortunately has 3, and I don't have room for it, but I put it off to the side. Underneath the reasoning, underneath where you'd put what your arguments potentially could be, it has evidence 1. And all you do here is list like what one of your potential first pieces of evidence would be. Again, in the sample one I'm going to do here for you in a second, they give you 3. You'd put one of them there by title. Underneath, they've got commentary number 1. Here's where you would write, like, how could you argue that this document would promote this position? Okay, and then they've got the same thing on the other side for option 2. If you argued the other way, what piece of evidence from the list they give you could you use? And then again, commentary, how would you say so? What in it would justify that? And then they've also got a spot down below for evidence 2. Again, pro one side, pro the other. And then commentary. How would you argue for that piece of evidence to support your claim for both sides? And then on the final page, they've got a thesis sheet. They want you to restate the prompt. This is where you would make your opening statement. Then it has make your point. I just write the word because there. I don't think you really need that. I don't know if that spot's even needed. Just put because. And then it has reasoning. That's where you're going to finish off your thesis statement. What would you say then for your reason, ultimately, of why you argue that position? Now, let me do a sample for you. I know I throw these things out there, then it's like if I don't give you a sample, it may not mean as much. There was a question posted on the College Board the other day, and here was how it was worded. As part of the blueprint for checks and balances, the United States Constitution outlines a procedure for Congress to impeach and remove public officials, including the President of the United States. Develop an argument on whether the congressional procedure outlined in the Constitution for impeachment and removal, and here are your 3 options, is an effective check on the President, is too weak of a check on the President, or option 3 is too strong of a check on the President. So they're giving you three options to choose from. You're either going to say that impeachment is an effective check, it's too weak of a check, or it's too strong of a check. The three pieces of evidence they provide to you in the question, they say, here are your three. They give you Brutus 1, Federalist 51, or Federalist 70. So your first evidence paragraph, you have to use at least one of those. Your second evidence can be from somewhere else, but you got to use at least one of those for your first. So I printed off, here's the copy of that sheet that I was talking about as far as like an outline. My reasoning, I've got option 1, impeachment is an effective check on the president. Option 2, impeachment is too weak of a check on the president. And then I created my own little spot off to the side there. Option 3, impeachment is too strong of a check. And then if you go down, the next item down is evidence 1. I chose Federalist 51 for the category it's an effective check. Option 2, impeachment is too weak. I went with Federalist 70. And for the third option, impeachment is too strong, I also put Federalist 70 because I think that you can use it to argue either position on that one. I'll show you why in a second. Commentary for all three of those first pieces of evidence. If you deal with the first reasoning of impeachment is an effective check, Federalist 51, what could you argue about this? I put down that Madison argued for a separation of powers and checks and balances. He also said there was a need for limited government so you would avoid corruption. I got that from the required foundational document sheet, the summary of Federalist 51. I just chose those two spots. Now, how about for the second possible option of impeachment is too weak? I went with Federalist 70. It says here that, again, according to Federalist 70, you need to have a strong and energetic president, and the president needs to act fast. Well, you could argue that a strong and energetic president has gone too far, and you could say by acting fast that sometimes the president acts too quickly while Congress has to act slowly. And again, that's identified in Federalist 70. How about option 3? Impeachment is too strong of a check. Again, I put down Federalist 70 as evidence. And how could you justify it? Alexander Hamilton said the executive must be strong and assertive. So if that's the case, you don't want necessarily him being impeached or that check being used. And he also said that if you need to have one person and they have to act fast and quickly. And you could argue then that according to this, impeachment would be too strong because it would slow him down. It would slow him down. Now down below, evidence number 2. Again, this is one that you can come up with yourself. So this can be the struggle sometimes, is like what to know to go with for that second option. I went with some of the ones, well, for the first couple, I went with ones that they had in their original list. So if I use Federalist 51 first, I could still use Brutus 1, which was in their list of the first 3 that I could use. And then my commentary on it is that according to Brutus 1 from that summary handout, once you give up power, you never get it back. So then you could argue thus that if you give the president too much power, that he will keep it, and that you don't want that, and then thus you could say that impeachment is an effective tool. And in Brutus number 1, it also argued that you have a need for limited government, and you could argue again that impeachment provides for limited government. In my second option category of impeachment is too weak, I went with Federalist 51 as my second piece of evidence, and if you look down, it calls for checks and balances. However, if you think about it, how many presidents have actually ever been impeached? The number? 0. It's been done 3 times, no removals, and really the only one that ever left was Richard Nixon. He probably would have been impeached, but he resigned before they could do it. So you could argue that impeachment is too weak because 51 calls for checks and balances, but really, in reality, it's never been effectively used. How about option 3, saying impeachment is too strong? My second piece of evidence, I went a little crazy here. I went with the Articles of Confederation. And in my argument, I said, if you look back at the Articles, the presidency was weak. It was like a 1-year term with someone who had no power. And when the executive was that weak, with that little of power, it was very ineffective for our government. And then you thus could argue that impeachment is too strong of a check because we need our president to be able to operate effectively, and this weakens him, and we've already seen what can happen according to the Articles when you have an overly weak president. Here's the thing I want you to notice. you have to be able to use the documents to your advantage. You need to know how to be able to spin an argument using them. Okay? You almost can use, as long as it makes somewhat sense, you can almost use any document really to present an argument. You just got to be able to know how to swing it, like either way, and use language and make your argument. And it's like, it's like a critical thinking skill. You got to be able to apply what the evidence is to what your argument's going to be. I was trying to think of an example because, like right there, I just used Federalist 70 in that example. I used Federalist 70 to both say that impeachment was too weak, and I used it to possibly say that impeachment was too strong. As long as you know what it stood for, Federalist 70, you can make an argument either way. It's up to you how you do it, but you can do it. You just have to make sure that it makes sense when you do it. I remember years ago, I don't know, you guys are probably, I know you're too young for this, but in 1995, there was the O.J. Simpson trial, and I don't know if you remember the story about him. He ended up, supposedly, it was like his wife and her friend, whatever, were murdered, and it looked like he did it. And he was on this car chase in his white Bronco. At the trial, he had all these like fancy, high-priced lawyers, and there was an argument the other side presented against him, and it was like this glove was found at the murder where it had happened, the crime spot. It was presumed that the glove was his, and they thought they had him nailed. Like, okay, this is direct evidence that this was him. He did it. Well, the defense attorneys basically got up, his lawyers, they basically brought the glove out, and they had him try it on in front of the jury. And when he went to try it on, it would not fit. And then his one goofy lawyer, Johnny Cochran, had this slogan, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. So they took one piece of evidence, and the one side thought it was a slam dunk, going to prove him guilty, and the other side used that same piece of evidence to basically make serious doubt that, no, he didn't do it. And if you never know the story behind that, it was because he had arthritis, and his hands would swell, and supposedly his hands was swollen when he went to put on that glove, and it didn't fit primarily because his hand was swollen. And the jury did find him not guilty in the criminal case, but in the civil trial, he was found guilty, and he had to pay the family members of his ex-wife and the other guy, he had to pay them money for that. Again, probably wasting some time there going over that story. I just wanted to show you again that the evidence can be used different ways. What is my point in all this? You need to be familiar with the 9 foundational documents. You need to be familiar with the 15 Supreme Court cases because you can argue them in your evidence too as well. In the second piece of evidence, you can use a Supreme Court case one. I was even trying to think of an example. I couldn't find a good one of the 15 cases that we talked about to deal with impeachment. I don't think any of them actually did. But I was thinking, like, let's say the case involves something about freedom of speech. You could argue for one piece of evidence, the First Amendment, that everyone's guaranteed the freedom of speech. You also could go other directions with it too. You could mention Schenck versus the United States and say that, yes, we have a right to freedom of speech, but in certain circumstances for national security, and then when it establishes like a clear and present danger, your freedom of speech can be limited by the government. The Supreme Court said so. You could use Schenck. How about spin it another direction? You could bring in Tinker versus Des Moines, and you could say, well, wait a second, we have freedom of speech. It shouldn't be restricted. And what about at school? And you could say, well, students, the court said students have a right to wear a black armband in protest of the Vietnam War. They have a First Amendment right to that. You could bring that in as a piece of evidence. So again, you can use the Supreme Court cases if they match up to whatever the prompt is. You can use them. So you got to be familiar with them. And again, other vocab that we've learned over the year can also be used. I was going to try to think of some examples to give you like a running list of pieces of evidence. Obviously, 9 foundational documents, 15 Supreme Court cases, any key vocab that we studied over the year. Federalism, executive privilege, well, the idea that the president can keep some things confidential. Any vocab, like the idea of like eminent domain, where the government is allowed to take your property from you if they pay a fair growing rate. Any of the vocab. And when we go over the meetings this week too, I thought we would go through the different units and kind of focus in on some of the key vocab just to make sure you guys again are familiar with it and you remember it. I was also going to say, remember when you use the evidence. Let's say, for instance, in the first piece of evidence, you use the U.S. Constitution. That's fair game. If they give it to you, they're probably going to give it to you most of the time. You can use it. You maybe even use a specific part of it. Like say if you're talking about Congress, deal with like Article 1. Article 1, Section 8 has all the powers of Congress. You can use that. Another good piece of evidence, the necessary and proper clause, where the government's powers have been expanded, Congress's. You could use that. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. Let's say for your second piece of evidence, you're really struggling with trying to come up with one of the foundational documents or Supreme Court cases or another vocab to answer the question. You could go with another part of the Constitution. You could go with an amendment if you want to. Another article. You just got to be careful. You can't go with the same specific thing that you went with for the first paragraph, for your first piece of evidence. So if you used Article 1, Section 8, powers of Congress for your first piece, you cannot use it for your second. But you could go to Article 2, or you could go to an amendment. That's fair game. Okay? That last sheet, like I was talking about, that last sheet, you just set up your thesis, how you want to design it. I just did 2 examples. I didn't go with the third option, so just to save some time. But let's say, for instance, you wanted to argue impeachment is an effective check on the president. So I put that down. That's my opening. All I'm doing is restating the prompt, but I'm making it as a statement now, not a question. I'm choosing a side. Impeachment is an effective check. In making your point, I just simply write the word because. You have to have because in there. And then you give them your line of reasoning. And here was an example the College Board presented. Removal is a serious matter and should require both chambers of Congress. That was their reasoning. If you want the other direction, impeachment is too weak of a check because it requires 2/3 majority in the Senate to remove a president, which has yet to happen in U.S. history. So that would be your line of reasoning. I did want to mention something else too. Last week when I met with like 6 of you for the one Zoom meeting, I was talking about how to properly set up a thesis, and we were talking about like what has to come at the end for that reasoning, that because statement. The different teachers and the College Board have really stressed you don't want to just simply say, let's say impeachment is an effective check on the president because, and then list your evidence that you're going to use in your actual writing. Don't say because James Madison argued for it in Federalist 51 and because in Brutus 1 it was argued that we need to have a limited government and impeachment provides that. Don't do that. Don't list the evidence. Don't even list the reasons you're going to use from the evidence. You don't want that in your thesis. You want to make a point, and then in your evidence paragraphs, you want to be able to explain why the evidence proves your point. You can't use the evidence in your point. So do not come out point blank and tell them that impeachment is an effective check on the president because, and then give them your evidence. Do not do that. You will not get the thesis point. Make a statement. Make a point that you think is true, and then let the evidence prove it for you. Now, when you're writing those evidence paragraphs, make sure, again, you identify what document you're going to use. Like, my first piece of evidence is Federalist 51. Then you have to describe what that means. Like, what is Federalist 51? So Federalist 51 was written by James Madison. It talks about separation of powers and checks and balances. It said that there was a need for limited government. Then what that description does is it shows the reader that what evidence you're presenting makes sense that you're using it in the context that you are, that it relates to the question. You got to prove to them that it relates to what you're being asked. Then you need to get in and you need to explain how Federalist 51 proves your statement at the beginning, your thesis. And I said, like, I like the idea that impeachment is an effective check on the president. Get in there and show why. And then that's where you get into details to say that, well, both chambers of Congress have to get involved, the House and the Senate. The House has to bring articles of impeachment, and the Senate has to vote through whether the person is guilty to actually get them removed. So it is a very effective check. It is, and you could argue that it keeps the president in line. You just got to make sure that you provide reasoning of why that evidence supports what you claimed at the beginning. A lot of the teachers that I've been interacting with on Facebook have also said that when you do the description and the explanation part of your evidence paragraph, put some evidence in there, or put some examples in there, real life examples. And that might be a case where you could say, like what happened with Donald Trump, that one way it's effective is because it went in, and yes, he wasn't removed, but he was impeached in the House. He was found not guilty in the Senate, but it does serve as a check on him, so he doesn't get too carried away with what he's doing. Or you can mention Bill Clinton, or you can mention Andrew Johnson, or you can mention Richard Nixon and say that the mere threat of impeachment actually got him to resign because he knew he was going to be impeached. So the threat of impeachment alone caused that. You could argue that too in your writing, but again, in your evidence paragraph, then you need to identify the evidence you're going to use. You need to describe it in relation to the prompt, and then you need to explain how this piece of evidence supports your claim. And I would use some of your wording that you used up in your thesis statement and in that final, like you want to say like a therefore comment. Therefore, use your evidence. Federalist 51, the idea that there are checks and balances and that we need to have limited government can be demonstrated in this case with impeachment. And again, explain it again. Just summarize it. You want to put all that in there. You want to get it in. You want to be identify, describe, explain, excuse me, in that evidence paragraph. And then again, you're going to do it again in that second evidence paragraph. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you, and I know we haven't done a ton of these. Again, the rest of the week, I'm going to throw examples your way. And I just want you to look through them, try setting them up, think about for yourself, what evidence would I use here? That's one of the key things, is just figuring out what evidence you want to use. Sometimes I think you guys are good writers, but it's just a matter of, okay, what evidence can I use, and then how am I going to use it? And as I said to the people in the Zoom meetings last week, sometimes you're probably going to want to look at your evidence before you officially start writing and decide what your thesis is going to be. Because sometimes you may look at the evidence and they give you a list of 3. You may know quite a bit about 2 of them, but not the 3rd. Or it may hit you right away like, oh, I could really use that one this way. Well, look at the other 2. Could you use either of the other 2 to argue that way? If not, think about, okay, what else do I know then from my other foundational documents and Supreme Court cases and everything else that I could use to argue that way? And if you can't come up with 2, maybe you want to try to argue the other way then. Because maybe something jumps out at you to argue the opposite point. And then also it was recommended that you use this outline sheet to your advantage. I mean, print it off and use it to your advantage. Jot some ideas down. Jot your evidence down right away, the 2 that you're going to use, so that when you start writing, you don't get flustered, and by the time you get done with your thesis and your opening or your intro evidence paragraph, your first one, you get to the second and you can't remember, oh no, what was my second evidence going to be? Have it written down so that it's right there for you, and then jump into it. So just remember, for that FRQ4, the first question of the AP exam, you're going to open it with a thesis statement. That can be your only thing you write for your opening paragraph, is the thesis statement. Your claim at the very beginning, that can be its own paragraph. Even if it's one sentence, that's fine. The next thing you will do is a full paragraph on evidence, and that'll be worth 3 points. You identify it, you describe it, you explain it, that's worth 3. And that final paragraph is your second piece of evidence. Again, identify, describe, and explain. Again, is worth 3. It's a grand total of 7 points. So, again, I just want to make sure everybody's up to date on what you have to do. I know you guys are good students, and I know you know a lot of information. I just want to make sure that you know what to do as far as the presentation of it for the readers, because you got to make sure that you know how to present it. If you just show up and you haven't looked at any of the review videos, and you haven't looked at how to set these up, and you just start writing and think, well, you know what, I'm going to I'll throw down Federalist 51 at them, and I'll throw the Constitution at them, I'll throw a few facts in there, and boom, I'm going to be good. You may not earn many points. You got to give them what they're looking for. Thesis, evidence 1 paragraph, 3 parts. Evidence 2 paragraph, 3 parts. Tie it together. Make sure you're closing the loop with your evidence, that it ties back into the prompt. Refer back to the prompt in your evidence as well, like I've said. But we'll talk more about it on Tuesday. Please, if you get a chance, check out that those practice questions today on the YouTube channel that I linked for you. So. All right, hope everybody's doing well out there, and I'll hopefully see all of you tomorrow at the Google Meet at 4 o'clock. Thanks.